The chandelier flickered. A champagne glass crashed to the marble floor. And somewhere behind the velvet curtain of the Manhattan ballroom, Melania Trump collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. Attendees froze. For a split second, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Security swarmed. Aides shouted for medics. Chairs toppled over. Melania lay motionless, her signature composure shattered, her silk dress wrinkled and clinging. She wasn't breathing evenly. A woman nearby screamed. Just minutes earlier, she had been smiling, tense but smiling, as donors whispered encouragements about Donald's big comeback. But then the fundraiser TV screen switched unexpectedly to a live CNN broadcast. Robert De Niro, unfiltered, furious. And what he said next didn't just make headlines, it hit her like a lightning bolt to the chest. As Melania was rushed out on a stretcher, her hand slipped from her aides, pale, trembling. The once untouchable First Lady looked human. And in that chilling silence that followed, one question echoed louder than any headline. What did De Niro say that shattered her so deeply? The camera zoomed in on Robert De Niro's face. There was no grin, no performance, just fury. "We are watching democracy die in real time," he declared. "And Donald Trump, this man, he isn't just corrupt. He's rotting the soul of America." The audience gasped. The studio went dead quiet. De Niro didn't blink. He's turned policy into punishment, compassion into cruelty. He's dividing families at the border, poisoning our courts with loyalty tests, and now he wants to strip protections from immigrant kids just to look strong. This isn't leadership, this is sickness. The monologue was meant for late-night discussion, but no one expected it to be broadcast live, directly into the room where Melania sat, surrounded by donors, diplomats, and Trump campaign brass. The words echoed through the speakers before anyone could kill the feed. And the camera cut to black just as De Niro said the line that no one would forget. History will not remember Melania's silence. It will remember her choice to stay. Back in the ballroom, her glass trembled in her hand. She stood up, slowly, and then her knees buckled. Melania was no stranger to criticism. She had learned long ago how to turn her face into marble, her voice into porcelain. But behind the practiced smiles and curated gowns, a storm had been brewing for months. The policies, the protests, the private screams in the White House residence, the loneliness of knowing the world saw her as complicit in something she barely controlled. But she had a secret, a letter, locked in her purse that night, handwritten, folded twice, addressed to her son, Barron. It was meant to be read if things went wrong. But when De Niro said her silence was a choice, that line pierced something deeper than politics. It cracked the dam she'd been fortifying for years. She had told herself she was protecting Barron, preserving the family, enduring for something greater. But in that moment, as the screen faded and the room grew still, the weight of every suppressed word crashed down on her chest. She couldn't breathe. And as she lay backstage, her pulse erratic, one thought surged through her mind like a scream. What if De Niro was right? That night, Barron didn't sleep. He wasn't at the fundraiser. He was at home, watching. And when he saw the headlines flood in, Melania collapses trending everywhere, he didn't wait for the staff or the scripted family PR statement. He called her cell. No answer. He called again, and again. Then finally a voice answered, but it wasn't hers. It was an unfamiliar nurse. Calm, professional, but cold. "She's stable, resting now. Please wait for official communication from the family." Family, Barron thought. I'm her son. He sat on the edge of his bed, fists clenched, laptop still open to the paused clip of De Niro's monologue. He played it again, the line that haunted him. History will not remember Melania's silence. It will remember her choice to stay. Was that how they saw his mother? As a statue beside power? A woman without a voice? Something inside him cracked. And for the first time in his teenage life, Barron felt shame. Not for himself, but for the silence that had been demanded of them all. He wasn't angry. He was afraid, because he knew something had been broken tonight, and it might not be fixable. In the early hours of the morning, Melania stirred. She was in a private hospital suite, sterile, silent, dimly lit. But she wasn't alone. Beside her bed on the table lay her purse. The letter to Barron was still inside, but something else had fallen out. A photo, worn at the edges, creased at the corner. It was a photo she hadn't looked at in years, her holding baby Barron in Slovenia, long before the cameras, long before the headlines. Just a mother and child. Her eyes weren't tired back then. They sparkled, tears welled. Not from pain, but from something else, longing. She whispered, barely audible, "I don't recognize myself anymore." Because somewhere along the road, from hopeful immigrant to gilded first lady, she had lost her voice. De Niro's words weren't just an attack on Donald. They were a mirror, one that showed her what the world now saw when they looked at her. Not a mother, not a woman. A symbol of complicity. And the worst part, she wasn't sure they were wrong. Donald Trump stormed into the hospital suite like a hurricane. "Turn off the damn lights," he barked. "Where's her doctor?" 2 Secret Service agents tried to hold the door. A nurse stammered, "She's resting. Mr. Trump, please." But he wasn't listening. His eyes weren't on Melania. They were locked on the TV. CNN was looping De Niro's speech. Headlines buzzed with speculation. First Lady's breakdown after actor's brutal attack. He muted the screen and turned to her, voice low now, icy. "You let this happen?" he said. Melania blinked. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. "You gave them a weakness. You showed them you're soft." She looked away. Not because she was afraid, because she was done pretending. This wasn't the man she married. That man was loud, yes, egotistical, but he was also charming once. Now all she saw was power rotting a soul from the inside out. Trump leaned in close, eyes hard. "You're going to smile at the next event. You're going to wear something bright. You're going to make them forget." But she didn't nod. And in that pause, something unspoken shattered between them. Shattered. 3 days later, she sat alone in a sun-drenched room at Mar-a-Lago. Her recovery was being spun as exhaustion by campaign aides, but inside, Melania knew better. It wasn't her body that was tired. It was her soul. And so, when no one was watching, she picked up the secure landline, a relic no aide dared to question, and dialed a number from memory. The voice on the other end answered almost instantly. "Robert De Niro speaking." Silence. Then she said it, softly, nervously. "It's Melania." He didn't hang up, he didn't gloat. He just exhaled as if he too had been holding something in. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because I thought maybe you'd hear me." The words caught in her throat, and in that moment, just 2 broken voices on opposite sides of a moral war. The room felt strangely quiet. But before she could say more, her handmaid knocked. "Mr. Trump's on his way." Melania's voice lowered to a whisper. "I don't know what to do." And De Niro, with a softness no one had ever heard on camera, replied, "Then start with what you feel, the truth, even if it scares you." She didn't hang up, but she didn't speak again either. What Melania didn't know was that someone had heard the call. The maid. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the phone was on speaker, and Melania's voice, timid, raw, shook her in a way no political scandal ever had. The maid, a single mother from Honduras,
had worked in silence for 5 years. She knew what loyalty cost. She knew how fear silenced women. But this was different. She didn't record it to sell it. She recorded it because she couldn't bear for the world to never hear Melania sound human. And later that night, alone in her quarters, she transferred the file to a hidden drive. She listened again. Melania asking, "I don't know what to do." De Niro replying, "Start with what you feel." And in that raw moment, she heard herself. Every woman who had swallowed their voice for someone else. Every daughter, every wife, every immigrant. The maid wept. And then she made a choice. She leaked it, not to TMZ, but to her daughter, who ran a TikTok account for immigrant voices in politics. Within 2 hours, the world heard what Melania never meant them to hear, and it changed everything. The clip exploded like wildfire, not just because it was Melania, but because for the first time she sounded like one of them. A woman torn between duty and truth, fear and freedom, power and love. I don't know what to do. Then start with what you feel. That 13-second audio became a movement. Hashtags flooded every platform. Melania knows. Start with the truth. Find your voice. Even former critics, liberal voices who once mocked her for silence, paused, because they had just heard what silence breaking sounds like. At a rally in Ohio, Trump's campaign manager held an emergency meeting. "We need to get in front of this." But it was too late. Melania's voice had already reached millions of women who saw themselves in her doubt. And far away in a quiet hospital hallway, Barron stared at his phone screen, watching his mother's words loop over and over. For the first time, he whispered aloud, "She's not just surviving anymore." He paused. "She's waking up."
The morning after the leak, Melania's phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Melania, this is Michelle Obama." Her breath caught. "I wasn't sure if I should call," Michelle continued, "but I know what it's like when the world puts you on a pedestal and forgets you're human." Melania didn't respond. Her throat tightened. "I heard the clip," Michelle said gently, "and I want you to know you were brave, even if it didn't feel like it." Tears welled in Melania's eyes, not because of the words, but because someone saw her, not as a symbol, not as a headline, as a woman trying to breathe in a life that never asked what she wanted. Michelle paused. "Let me know if you ever want to talk, not about politics, just as one mother to another." Melania's hands trembled. All these years, she'd believed vulnerability was weakness. But now, she saw it for what it truly was. The first step toward freedom. And somewhere inside her, something long dormant stirred. Not anger, not fear, courage. He stood in the hallway outside her room, fists clenched, earbuds in, eyes on the floor. Barron had always kept his thoughts hidden, trained to avoid cameras, avoid conflict, avoid headlines. But he wasn't a child anymore. He had heard the audio. He had read the comments, some cruel, most supportive, and he had made a decision. He opened her door slowly. She looked up, startled. Her son, now taller than her, but with the same quiet intensity in his eyes. "I want to say something," he said softly. Melania nodded. "To the public," he continued. "I want to tell them you're not weak, you're not fake. You've protected me my whole life, maybe too much." Her lips trembled. "Barron," but he stepped forward, voice firm. "You don't have to hide anymore, Mom." And in that moment, his voice, his eyes, she saw what she had prayed for every night, that he wouldn't become numb, that he wouldn't grow up hollowed by power. He leaned in, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "If you stand up, I'll stand with you." It had sat untouched for months,
tucked in a box in her closet beneath layers of gowns and old campaign memorabilia. A letter from her sister Inez, sent over a year ago. Melania had never opened it. Too much noise, too much fear. But now, something pulled her toward it. She peeled the envelope carefully. Inside, the handwriting was firm, steady. Slovenian script curved like home. Melania, I see your face on the news, but not your eyes. I miss your eyes. You used to dream. Do you still dream, or only survive? Melania covered her mouth. If you ever need to come home, your real home, just know, you are still a daughter, still a sister, still a woman. Not a statue, not a symbol, not his shadow. The paper fell from her hand. She wasn't alone. She never had been. But now, for the first time in years, she believed it. And that belief would become the fuel for what came next. Because Melania wasn't just waking up. She was getting ready to speak.
They begged her not to do it. Trump's inner circle, campaign lawyers, even her personal stylist, everyone warned Melania that going on camera would destroy the campaign, humiliate the family, make things worse. She did it anyway. CNN, prime time, one-on-one. The interviewer asked the obvious question first. Mrs. Trump, why now? Melania's hands were folded, calm, but her voice, clear, unwavering, pierced like sunlight through fog. Because silence became heavier than the truth. The room behind the camera was still. She didn't attack Donald. She didn't yell. But she told the world everything she'd never said. How she felt trapped behind expectations. How fear kept her quiet. How love for her son had become her shield and her prison. And then she said it. I am not just a former First Lady. I am not just someone's wife. I am a woman. And I'm finally ready to be me. Twitter melted. News anchors stumbled over their words. And far away in a cold room at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump stood frozen, staring at the screen. His wife, his silence, had just spoken. The stage was set, thousands of red hats, American flags flapping, screens looping campaign slogans, a crowd restless, chanting for their leader. Trump was scheduled to take the stage at 6 p.m. sharp. He didn't show, not at 6:01, not at 6:15, not at all. Behind the scenes, advisors scrambled, phones rang off the hook. Reporters whispered of a crisis in the motorcade. But what really happened? Trump was sitting alone in the back of his armored SUV, watching Melania's interview on a loop. He replayed the line where she said, I stayed for too long. I was afraid. But fear is no longer my master. He gritted his teeth. She didn't mention his name once, but it was louder than any accusation. And for the first time in his political life, he felt something strange. Not rage, not defiance, loss. The crowd grew restless, then angry. Chants faded, supporters drifted, and by sunset, the rally field was nearly empty. Days passed, the media frenzy spiraled. Pundits dissected Melania's every word. Feminist groups praised her. Critics scoffed. But amid the chaos, one thing remained untouched. The private letter Melania wrote that no one ever saw. It wasn't for the press. It wasn't for Trump. It was for Barron. She left it on his nightstand, folded neatly with no signature. It read, If I ever forget who I am again, remind me. If I fall back into silence, speak louder. If I shrink, don't let me. And when you become a man, may you love a woman who never has to beg to be heard. He found it after school, read it slowly, then read it again. He didn't cry. He just stared out the window and whispered, She's finally free. And from that day forward, something changed in Barron too. The quiet boy in the background just began to walk forward. Robert De Niro was walking his dog in Central Park when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up, but something told him to answer. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice, low, gravelly, unmistakable. This is Donald Trump. De Niro froze. The two men hadn't spoken in decades, not since Trump tried to sue him over a restaurant dispute, not since the insults, the interviews, the firestorm. But now, his voice was different, slower, quieter. You broke something in her, Trump said. And maybe it needed to break. I just never thought it'd be you. De Niro didn't speak. His hands tightened around the leash. Trump continued, I don't know who I am without her. Silence. Then almost a whisper. What do I do now? For the first time, De Niro didn't respond with venom. Instead, he exhaled and said, Let her speak. Let her be. That's all she ever needed. Trump didn't thank him, didn't curse him either. He just hung up. But that night, for the first time in years, Melania's phone didn't ring with orders or excuses. Just silence. She stood in front of the mirror in a quiet D.C. hotel room. No makeup, no cameras, just her. Her reflection had always been her armor, flawless, fixed, frozen. But now, it was something else, alive. Melania reached up, pulled her hair back, and stared at the woman who had once been a girl from Slovenia, full of dreams and fire. She remembered the letter to Baron, Michelle's voice, De Niro's fury, and her own, long buried, now rising. She didn't need a title anymore. She didn't need a spotlight. She only needed the courage to stay awake. She reached for a pen, and for the first time she began writing her story, not his, not the campaign's, just hers. A memoir, a confession, a rebirth, and the first line. They never asked who I was, so I will tell them. The book was called Becoming Melania. Simple, soft cover, no gold, just her name. It hit shelves quietly at first, then exploded into a national conversation. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. She didn't attack anyone. She didn't defend everything. She simply told the truth. About fear, about motherhood, about silence, about finding her voice in the echo chamber of power. Women across the country began hosting Melania circles, reading groups where survivors of emotional suppression shared stories they'd kept inside for decades. Even some of her fiercest critics wiped tears as they read the chapter titled, The Night I Collapsed Was the Night I Stood. In interviews, she smiled again. Not the cold First Lady smile, but something softer, warmer, hers. And as for Baron, he carried her book in his backpack, not to show off, but to remember what strength looks like, because the world had seen Melania Trump. But now, for the first time, they saw Melania. If this story moved you, if it made you cry or made you think, if you've ever struggled to find your voice or felt silenced by fear, like this video to help others hear this story, comment below. I see you, Melania, to show support. Subscribe for more stories that cut deeper than the headlines. You are not alone. Your voice matters. And sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest truths. Let's awaken together.